All right. Hello, everyone. And thank you for joining me for another episode of Transforming Social Justice. And this today, again, we've got Jen with us. So it's the Jen and Meg show. Now, as you all know, I never allow anyone to call me Meg, but Jen is just that special of a person. So,
Oh,
Jen, I'm so glad you're here with me again today. And I'm ready for a great conversation. What do you say we jump in?
oh my God, me too. Well, thank you so much for having me. I love being here with you.
Absolutely. So, Jen, we're
Hmm.
going to talk about accessibility today. And accessibility is really up your alley. I mean, it's really a lot of what you do. And we're going to talk
Hmm.
about accessibility with just building code and accessing buildings, but also accessibility for our children, because I know both of us really lean into balancing that act of being a mom and being a business owner and doing the work we do. And really remembering that our number one job in this world, and at least the one that brings me the most purpose and joy, and I think you agree with that, but being a mom. So,
Absolutely. Number
yeah,
one job. The best job I can do.
the best job in the world. Also the most tiring job, but it is the best job in the world.
The most anxious job.
Don't
The
talk about
anxiety
anxiety right now
through
with
the roof.
moms. You know, my son, remember,
I
Reese just
know.
started football. So the
I know.
anxiety watching him play.
I know. I know. And getting
Hmm.
him ready and making sure he gets enough sleep and making sure he's eating and making sure he's not taking things personal. I can't imagine.
Oh
Just
my
just
God.
yesterday I had a call from school and my anxiety was through the roof.
Right. You look at your phone and caller ID says the school and you're like,
'Cause I know, and
oh.
immediately I drop everything. Even if I'm in a meeting, I say, "Excuse me, I have to take a minute," and then I do. It doesn't matter what's happening. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially since he's going through a new school. Yeah, so
Yeah. And
that's
we
it.
have
That's
to
the
be
life.
those advocates and those people that will drop everything for our children. And
Yeah.
we have to be those cheerleaders and those change makers with our children, because if they can't depend
Mhm.
on us as their parents, then we're not teaching them that they can depend on many people at all. So,
That's so true.
yeah.
Y- you really have to trust your gut as a mom because
Mhm.
and it takes maybe a little bit of maybe first 2 years when you really develop that scale of like, wait a minute, something doesn't sound right here. And it's not like people are against you, right? But it is like, hold on, I disagree with that in saying
Mhm.
something. So he's in a Christian school. I grew up Christian, and part of me feels like a lot of the discipline that I hone into came from that foundation. I'm
Mhm.
not necessarily very religious, but I believe in God, right?
Mhm.
So I want him to have that foundation, and
Mhm.
I think that that's crucial because he will have some sort of self control. This Christian school is to be completely honest, a bit strict when it comes to he's in TK only. So they're trying to establish getting ready for elementary and getting ready for the level of performance they want.
Right.
And he's going through school, and the teachers, he comes home and tells me that, hey mommy, I'm gonna put your name under the little sad face. And I'm just like, what is that about? So, and for those who don't know, my son is on the spectrum, and he has a speech delay. So he has an ABA with him every day from 8 a.m. from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. or 1 p.m. And so what we're working on is positive reinforcement. There's certain for children in under the spectrum is different for everybody, but for my son, he has, for example, a skill where I would say, um, and I don't know how you call it in other words, but basically, it's a habit that he's developed in order to cope with the frustration.
Mm.
So he develops a habit, like for example, of maybe self sabotage. Like, Elliot, don't do that. He does it more. So in
Mm.
order to avoid that, we use positive reinforcement.
Mhm.
And in school, in Christian schools, they don't do that. There's always a consequence for bad behavior. So they are treating him like that, versus with the therapist we have an agreement that if he was able to stand still for 2 minutes, that's like, good job, Elliot, you did 2 minutes and we're going to do 1 more minute. Instead, the school is, no, you have to stand for 5 minutes and no other option. Like, there's nothing to reinforce here. It's 5 minutes.
Mm,
So as it turns out, we all met, and we need to have another meeting to go over goals, because they don't understand that. They do not understand that.
mm,
It was actually quite like Twilight Zone for me. Like, what? Like, you don't really understand what positive reinforcement does for a human being? So, but they're very nice at the same time. So it's not
mhm,
like they don't get it. It's that they see consequence, and I can see
mhm,
religion right through it. So now I'm thinking I might have been wrong in putting him in a Christian school. So
mm,
there's the, like you were talking about, like things that I need to make accessible for my son as he grows older, right? And
mhm,
and I think that this is one of them, making sure that I'm not in my own preconception of what something would look like, but does it actually work for him as he's going through it? And that's being a mom. And then, not to mention, how other people disagree with it, and then you have to roll with it. And then you also can't make a big deal out of things, because you need your sanity. So, okay, well, the school didn't work, so let's find another one. Or
mhm,
let's really try to homeschool him, or but
mhm.
I think what I'm trying to say is, we're trying to do just whatever is at our just hands reach right here, right
Yeah,
now. Because if we think too much in the long term, then we could go pretty down the wrong path. So,
right. Yeah. And thank
but
you
yeah,
for sharing
yeah,
that story
yeah,
because, I mean, that's a big part of accessibility, right? Is when we
yeah,
talk about this month, our topic is ableism and it's
yeah,
about accessibility. But oftentimes people think of ableism and accessibility as just physical. And,
right.
when you bring in the idea of being on the spectrum, that does fall within that because it's about making
Mhm,
those different
mhm.
learning services and the different opportunities accessible to all of our children, regardless of what they're coming to the table with or without, right? And
Exactly, and
I
not a
love that
lot of
you brought
people
that
understand.
in.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And not a lot of
Yeah.
people understand how this works. I mean, I personally didn't understand a lot of things,
Right.
and now I'm thinking, okay, there is, the neurotypical brain works this way, and my son's is works in a different way.
Right.
And that's all. And so we just need to
Yeah.
understand how it works, and it's actually quite interesting as well.
So when we talk about that accessibility piece, and you brought in the term of neurotypical, right? So we have
Hmm.
neurotypical and neurodivergent.
Hmm.
When we talk about accessibility and ableism, it's about the physical abilities
Hmm.
as well as hearing and sight abilities, as well
Uh-huh.
as the neurodivergence components, like you spoke of.
Uh-huh.
And since you're sharing a story of your son, when I think of this concept with my son, we had this experience where your child is neurodivergent, right? He's on the spectrum. That is something that he will
Hmm.
have for the rest of his life.
Hmm.
There's
Hmm.
also with ableism those moments where you might have a situation where you have temporary inaccessibility. So, what that could be is maybe someone breaks their leg and they use crutches for a while, or maybe someone breaks their arm and they're not able to use both arms. So, that would be a temporary inaccessible moment. My
Got it.
son
Yeah.
experienced one of those temporary moments. So last year, he was in middle school and he hurt his leg really badly. So he was in a brace. He wasn't allowed to bend his knee. He was on crutches. And in his school was 2 levels.
Huh.
And you would think that there would be
There's an
accessible
elevator.
opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Well, they have an elevator, but the
Uh-huh.
elevator did not work. So, and it wasn't one of those things until it was brought to attention because they just said, well, everyone can use the stairs. And as soon as my son said, well, he can't use the stairs because he wasn't allowed to bend his leg, and trying to teach a 12 or 13-year-old how to use crutches up and down flights of stairs, it's difficult for adults to do that, let alone a child.
Exactly. Exactly.
So we went through that whole experience of having to advocate of we need to fix the elevator, right? We need to make sure that there is accessibility for all of our
Hmm.
students. And what happens if a child transfers in tomorrow who is permanently in a wheelchair? Or what happens if another child breaks their leg or something happens?
That's
They have
incredible.
surgery.
Yeah, you would think that those things are like, common sense for a lot of people,
Right. And I
right?
think it was
And
one of those pieces of course, we'll work on that once it was brought to their attention, but it wasn't that lens of consistently looking for, is
right.
our building accessible for
Mhm.
everyone? Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when
I,
we
I
talk
get
about accessibility of buildings, that's where you come in.
yeah.
And just as a reminder for the audience, can you share a little bit about your background and about LA Expedite and
Sure.
why this is such
Sure.
a topic that you can share on?
Absolutely. So I have been in construction for 20 years now. I started very, very young. I was 17 when I started. I run a company called LA Expedite Inc., and our sole purpose is to streamline what is called the pre-construction process. So ensuring that everything is code compliant before a building is ready to be constructed. So in this case, ADA is definitely something we have to go through as part of our
Mhm.
process. And for example, for when we're doing permits for a school, a new building, see nowadays, nowadays what we do is pretty much making sure that everything passes through not only pre-inspections but inspections during construction. But nowadays buildings are not allowed to be built unless they are ADA compliant.
Mm.
So that's already established on the building code, across states, and obviously what's the national building code, right, and the international building code. So
Mhm.
when architects are designing a building, they constantly have to look at the ADA compliance. Now, what happens with the buildings that are already built? They are called retrofits here in California. So now the mayor established that a building needs to be retrofitted if it's older than 1920, for example.
Mm.
Anything older than 1920, though, also becomes a historical building. So you can't just touch a building just like that and
Right.
say, okay, this needs to be ADA compliant. So that's why they define zones, and they say, okay, well, in this zone, this is a historical zone, only single family homes are allowed to be here. So a single family home, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 1 story, right? Or if it's a 2 story, then it needs to have it doesn't need to have an elevator or anything because they're historic, right? But if it's a regular area and a regular zone where it's a major city, then this is when it gets complicated. So the state passes laws, and they usually start with SB, like an ordinance. And you have to constantly look as an architect or as a citizen to see what kind of law is out there that could help you not only take advantage of government money to retrofit your building, which means really renovating your building up to code,
Mhm.
to the current code 2023. And if there are no incentives, then could you get tax breaks? That's one way
Mhm.
that some people that are developing look into doing. But nowadays here in California, ADA law is very strict, and that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that there's still a lot of accessibility out there, because I still see in the infrastructure, just around here, um, some things that should be better, like the crossing the street. There should be a better system. Some cities in Europe have really good systems, but everything, if you see the ramps, the curbs, and things like
Mhm.
that. You do see that around California. So a lot of new
Mhm.
construction would take care of that, but especially a school, and like in your case for your son,
Mhm.
like I would be surprised. I mean, if you would have called me, I would have probably called the building department,
Mhm.
and so we're about to get there, okay? So I would call the building department and call them to see if they could issue an inspection. And what
Mhm.
we would probably call for a mechanical inspector to come out there to check the elevator.
Mm.
And immediately they issue a violation. And when that's in order, the school needs to comply to that. But because those inspections aren't happening regularly or on schedule because they're supposed to happen. In fact, there's laws saying that these inspections need to happen every year, if not more, especially for public buildings,
Hmm.
museums, schools, anything public, a gym. Those areas where the public is at the most, they need to be inspected more often from several agencies like the health department, building department, mechanical, electrical, for safety. Especially one big concern for a lot of people in construction for public spaces is fire. So
Mm.
anything related to fire. So if the elevator doesn't work, right? What happens if the stairs are blocked? What happens to a public building, right? What are the means of egress, entering and exiting a building? And so when something like that happens, it's like shocking to me that the school board doesn't understand, like they have to comply with that, otherwise they're in big
Right.
trouble. So something
Wow.
like that could easily be fixed by calling the building department of your jurisdiction and saying that you see that you're seeing that there is no ADA compliance for an elevator or a public building, and if they could potentially call, you give them the address, and then they send an inspector. And this is just our citizens' right. This is
Mm.
not anything other than that, because you're not doing anything wrong.
Right.
Exactly. Like, you're really not doing anything wrong because this is supposed to happen every so often. So,
Right.
yeah, I hope that was
Wow.
useful.
It was very helpful. And, it's really interesting because as you're talking, I'm like, okay, that's great for public buildings, but I'm also thinking about my personal situation right now where I'm
Right.
looking for a home.
Right.
And just for anyone who might not have been listening to previous episodes or aren't aware, I have lupus. And with my lupus, it is expected that I will lose quite a bit of my mobility. And there is a strong
Mm-hmm.
possibility that I will be in a wheelchair in the next few years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking to purchase a new home now while I'm still pretty able bodied. And
Mm-hmm.
we're looking for a first floor primary bedroom and bathroom. And
Right.
to add on top of that, I'm also looking for an area for my parents who use
Yeah.
wheelchairs and scooters and walkers right now. So we're
Yeah.
looking for a walkout basement that gives them access to their own space. And
Right.
then a first floor primary suite where all of the living space is on one floor. And my
Right.
son can be on the second floor, but we're looking for that type of a home. And it has
Right.
been so difficult. And then,
Yeah.
depending on when the home was built and what kind of architecture is used, there are very small doorways that you wouldn't be able to fit through necessarily with a walker or a wheelchair. There
Oh,
are some homes that do not
yep.
have showers, they only have bathtubs, which are very difficult for people who have any kind of mobility issue. You have some
Mm-hmm.
homes that have one or two steps at different points in the home for an
Mm-hmm.
architectural effect, which can be beautiful, but it can
Right.
make it almost impossible for anyone who struggles with
It's not
stairs.
accessible. It's just not
Right.
accessible. Right.
And it's
You
just
know,
very difficult.
you saying that there's definitely like room for improvement for homeowners, right? Where
Mhm.
I see, just in my neighborhood, I see people building ramps. So
Mhm.
on my street, there's probably a generation of owners that have been here for maybe the last 100 years, like where they're passing down homes to, right? So you
Wow.
could
Right.
see a lot of people walking, taking walks, and you could see, oh, look at, el viejito, the little old guys coming by, like, hi,
Right.
like that. Those are my neighbors, right? And you could see like these houses were definitely not designed for
Yeah.
accessibility. And when there isn't code that makes these houses be retrofitted,
Mhm.
then that's when you lobby.
Mm. So
And
what does that look
you
like, Jen?
so what that looks like is when a project comes to me, and right now I have a project in an agriculture area. It is
Okay.
perfect for subdividing it and building more homes.
Okay.
But turns out they don't allow it. They want condominiums. What my client wants to build is single family homes, not condominiums. They want a family in
Mm.
there. So they immediately said, no, not happening. So you go through the process of knowing that by code, you're not going to get approved. So you go for zoning variance and you take that opportunity. It's complicated because you still need to get an architect, you still need to get an engineer, you still need to a surveyor, soils, you need to spend some money, at least $20,000 before you can possibly get in
Wow.
front of the board. And that's when you lobby the heck out of it and you say,
And when you say the
well,
board, are you talking about the planning board or like
the
what,
planning board, the
or the
planning board,
zoning
thank
board?
you. Yeah, the planning board.
Okay.
So zoning board over there in New York, it was called the zoning board.
Okay.
And you simply start lobbying and you start mentioning the housing crisis, the amount of elderly, and the need for senior housing, or simply accessibility for people that need accessibility.
Mm.
And you lobby and you lobby and you lobby and you have the community, you build community rapport, you get the community involved. You get statistics around your area of how many people potentially are about to enter into senior level. And if they are, then that means you can provide numbers saying, hey, this is what's happening. We have
Mhm.
all these people in our community that will have absolutely no way of getting into their showers or entering their homes unless they invest 20, 30, $40,000 into their homes so they can make it accessible. It's not fair. And so
Mm.
what they do, what ends up happening is the board members and the mayor and the governor now start recognizing that there needs to be a rezoning or what's called a community plan. If there's a
Mm.
community plan in your area, then they immediately change law. And now this is so complicated. It's like there's no way you could do all these easily unless you start with community support and getting everybody on board and send letters to the mayor of your city
Yeah.
and calling for some sort of reform that could help
Right.
you with that. Now we do it more on the professional side where the investor's ready to spend that money,
Right.
um, but they don't typically go for things that are complicated like this because they know it could take years, two, three
Right.
years, and they don't have money to sit there. So it's very unfortunate, very, very unfortunate. There's really nobody you could call. I mean,
Mm.
honestly, the solution, there's nobody you could call and say, hey, can you guys come to this house that I just got and can you help me fix it and make it ADA compliant? No, I think it needs to start from the top, where maybe a tax break for people that did remote work for ADA compliance. That could be
Mm.
potentially something good for you. Like if you have to buy a house and you need to fix it because you're going to need to fix it because you can't find a house that fits your current scenario, then you
Mhm.
should get a huge tax break, at
Right.
least, like, for your own business or your personal taxes, or you should
Mm.
get a refund. Something needs to
Mhm.
happen where you're, because they can't control all the homes. But I
Right.
can tell you, most likely the new code that your city adopts does have some sort of ADA compliance. I mean, I can find out right now. But I'm pretty sure
I
that
mean,
there's
you're walking through
something.
the process of being an actual change maker, right? It's about
Yeah,
building
exactly.
that community rapport and building the
Exactly.
community support because it's not one person
No,
cannot do every piece, right? And
no,
one person cannot do everything.
no,
And at the
no way.
same time, every single one of us has the ability to be a part of that change that we need to do. And
It
it's so
it's so
important.
good. It's so good that you said that because, I think this is why you and I are really good friends, because in one way or another we believe in our voice, but our voice has is doesn't mean anything unless the community sees that their voice matters too.
Yep.
And a lot of what I do involves, like, I'm not necessarily the aggressive type of person that would, like, always, like, know what to say at the right moment.
Mhm.
That's not true. That would be lying. But what I do have is like that relentless um initiative and attitude of making things happen.
Mhm.
And I do notice politically, like when I'm lobbying for a project, that I attract, you know like I can attract more flies with honey than with vinegar. And
Yeah.
that's been, and sometimes I want to use vinegar every single time.
But that's true in human nature. It's
Yeah,
not just in
yeah,
the political realm or in the building
true.
realm, or human nature is we are drawn to people who make us feel good.
Yeah.
And all of us have the desire sometimes to throw a little vinegar on some situations,
And
right?
we do, because we have to.
Mhm.
Like with my son's
Mhm.
teacher yesterday, I was like, "What is that sad face about? I don't understand." You know,
You're like, see
like
this face? It's a sad face because you gave him a sad face. So we're
you
going to
should
have this
put my name.
conversation about a sad face.
You should put my name under that sad face right now. Yeah. So yeah, I get it. But you're right. Like that's where you start understanding, and this is why I love the United States so much, believe it or not. But it's, I feel like there is a chance. At least you have a chance to do something
Mhm.
about it. And
Mhm.
but yeah, a lot of things are so unfair. Like when I hear stories
Yeah.
of, I used to hear stories in New York when I was doing my business in New York Expedite. There were people that we would encounter telling us that it would take them uh 3 to 4 hours to get home when it takes, because they were on a wheelchair,
Mm.
instead of 1 hour, which is the regular normal train ride that it would take a person to commute from one point to another, especially if they're exiting the city. 4 hours, because they had to find different routes. They had to be lifted. Like it was horrible how they would get into the trains. Like obviously there are elevators, but the elevators don't work, and like horrible. And the experience itself is just detrimental. Like I don't know how people with disabilities do it. I really do hope that they're reaching out to therapists and people that are there for them. Now that I have
Mhm.
my son, I'm like, wow, there is so much room for being a change maker, because
Mhm.
no, there is no awareness for so
Mhm.
much, and
Yeah.
it's like, wow, it's
Right.
2024, and
Right.
and yeah,
And you talk about how you didn't have that level of awareness until your son really brought that in because of, when we
right.
have someone close to us, whether it's a family member or a friend, when we have someone close to us that we care about, we tend
Hmm.
to lean into those conversations and explore and
Hmm.
have more curiosity about topics that maybe we knew nothing about beforehand. And I think that's so important for all of us to acknowledge and then look at your circle and say, are there identities or are there specific pieces that I don't have in my circle about society? So if you don't have anyone in your inner circle who has a different ability, and we use the
Right.
term different ability instead of disability, right?
I
But
like that.
if you
I
don't
love
have
that.
anyone in your inner circle that has a different ability than the neurotypical or the physically typical person,
Right.
consider bringing that in. Or if you don't have anyone in your close circle of a different race, or if you don't have someone of a different
Right.
gender or religion, consider bringing that in, because if you can build those relationships with people
Hmm.
from different identities, then you lean in with more curiosity so that you can be that change maker,
That's
right?
beautiful. Beautifully said. Couldn't have said it
And
better.
when you talk about when you talk about being in the US, my
Hmm.
family and I, my parents are, as I shared, they're in scooters or like the motorized wheelchairs,
Hmm.
and we travel. One of the things I started doing when my son was born is I
Hmm.
promised my parents I would take them on a family trip every year so that they can build a relationship with their grandson and my son
I
can build a
love that.
relationship with his grandparents. And we've been able to go to some amazing places.
I love that.
What I also notice is that there are many
How
places around the
difficult.
world that do not have access. So
Not
I took
ready.
the entire family to Italy a couple of years ago. Um,
Uh-huh.
I remember we went and
Yeah.
we basically had to figure out a way to tour Italy from our car, because going and walking around, there were so many stairs and there were no close
Of
parking
course.
spots. And because Europe is very much a walking culture. I mean, you
Hmm.
walk everywhere.
Totally. Yeah.
And it was
Wow.
so,
I haven't even thought about that. That's
yeah.
challenging. How did you do it?
So pretty much. So I was the driver and I loved
Uh-huh.
it because I love driving in all
Hmm.
different places. But
Same.
I was the driver and we would just figure out where we were going to go, and we would be able to drive really close. And if we couldn't drive close enough, then I would figure out where I could pull in just to let
Hmm.
them out so that they could at least get out somewhere close. And then I would go park and walk because at that point I was able to walk pretty
Right.
well,
Right.
but we had to figure out those points of drop off. And then moving forward, I took my mom. My dad didn't go because he knew Europe was not super accessible. But my
Hmm.
mom and my son and I went to Ireland. And
Hmm.
again, very similar. My mom struggled, and my mom is extremely stubborn. I get my stubbornness from her, but she is extremely stubborn. She's like, oh, I can do it. There was one place that she really wanted to go. It was a beautiful fountain. It was actually St. Patrick's Fountain. So it was the pilgrimage of St. Patrick. And she's not very religious, but she just really is intrigued by some of the religious
Right. Right.
doctrine and landmarks.
Right.
So we went, and it was probably 100 stairs,
Oh
and
my.
she was set on she was going to go. And I remember we had to stop probably 4 or 5 times. And at one point, I was scared because her lips were turning blue and I was scared. And I kept
Wow.
looking around like, if we have to call for an ambulance, I don't know how they're going to get here
Right.
because it
Oh my
was
God.
long stairs through a trail, like through the forest, right?
And there was like no path for her to go unless she had to go through
No,
stairs.
there was
You know,
no path.
I don't think the world is ready. I don't think the
No,
world is we're still dealing with this here in the United States, where I've traveled as well, and I think that I've seen our infrastructure to be some of the best in the world, right? Like we have the highways, we have trains, we have, and we're still struggling. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Europe, I'm not sure. Well, there may be Netherlands, maybe, but Italy, of course, like historic places, they're not
Right.
ready for ADA compliance, for
And it's all
accessibility.
cobblestone streets. So, I mean, I
Yeah,
can barely walk in regular shoes on cobblestone streets without
you
tripping,
would
let
think
alone
that they could build a really tiny pathway, like at least you can push
something.
somebody in a wheelchair.
Yeah. And
But
it's
no,
so
they're not doing
hilly.
it. Right. It's all about the requirements. It's what these places are required to comply with. That's where the change would start here in America. What they're
But
required to
what's
comply with.
difficult, and I wonder this, right? And that's the whole
Yeah.
thing of being a anti-discriminatory or an
Right.
anti-ableist
Right.
compared to a change maker, because an anti-ableist is going to wait for the policy. They see something, they
Right.
fix it. A
Right.
change maker looks at it
Uh-huh.
and says, before we experience this issue, how can we make sure everything's accessible? So before we wait for someone to come to us and say, hey, you have only 5 spaces for me to park
Right.
in, they're
Right.
looking at it and saying, what is the demographic of the people who come to visit this landmark? Or what is the demographic of the people who come to this location?
Right.
Do we have enough space for
Uh-huh.
people of that demographic? And of course, there would have to be some assumptions made, et cetera. But
Right.
that
But
is
the
something
answer is
that's the
yes.
difference.
There is space. You just have to
Mhm.
convert some of the regular parking spaces into ADA compliant spaces,
Right.
you know?
And it's such a in some cases, in this case, it's a
Hmm.
very simple switch.
Right.
Converting homes, converting buildings to be more
Hmm.
accessible, absolutely, it's more cost. It can be
Hmm.
difficult. Sometimes there's not a footprint to be able to do that. All of those things,
Hmm.
I hear it.
Right.
And the only way we're going to be able to make the world a more accessible place is by taking
Right.
the action to make it happen. We can't
It's
keep
true.
talking about it and saying how
Right.
wonderful it would be if, and we have to say, what am I going to do right now?
You know what would be kind of interesting? Like if people filed permits for public places or even their own homes, right? Like, but obviously
Mm,
their own homes, but for public places, and said, "Hey, I would like to make this parking spot ADA compliant because there's not enough parking when I take my mom for grocery shopping. It's only three or
mm.
four on each row. That's not enough. We need more." And so I'm filing a permit so you could and see, like, that could be a
That would be
way
interesting.
to trigger them. Um, But you're absolutely right, man. It's kind of like what's going on right now politically. And I won't speak about it, but I do see like there's a lot of, they just elected the first woman president in Mexico. We might be electing a woman, this time around. I personally like her and don't like her, but there's some things that, like, I'm saying, like, what if, like, the time is now, right? What if the
Mm-hmm.
time to really see change is now? Like, I see my son and I wonder, like, why is this happening to me? Like, not like as a victim, but like I wonder if there's something I need to do that will,
Yep.
bring awareness to this, because would I have not been, a mom, of the mother of my son, I wouldn't have really seen like his little tiny struggles. Like, I see, he can pay attention, but he's got so much energy, and most people don't understand that. And it's like, really, why? And it's like, why is this happening? I feel like, if you see something, and I believe in the laws of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
there's a reason why. If you're aware
Absolutely.
of something, there's a reason why. and
Mm-hmm.
and if you see this, you have been like instrumental for me, for my growth, in making sure there's I'm including everybody in my company, and what I'm saying, actually, it's respectful, and I'm putting myself in people's shoes. um it, there's If you wouldn't have been there, there have probably have been notions in my head that were automatically there without me stopping and thinking
Mm.
what that was about. So you have already made a difference
Mm.
in my life. So what's the difference we can all make in everybody's life, right? Like, we don't know
Love
that
that.
until we actually go and do it.
Right.
Because, and then you might not be getting paid for it, right? Like, you're sometimes giving me advice or things that you're saying to me personally, that I'm thinking, yeah, that's a great idea, but you're not getting paid for it. So there's no way for you to know that you're making a difference unless I tell you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people need to also, give back when they're
Mm-hmm.
being given something, because in this whole thing, right, it's about creating a better world for ourselves. I think
Right. It's our
that's, yeah,
human responsibility that once we know something, we have to do something about that. Something we say at
exactly.
us where it is, once you know better, you must do better. Right.
Yeah.
And it's the idea of it's our human responsibility that if we are given information, we have to do something with that.
Yes.
Number one, it's selfish for us to hold that in.
Mhm.
And number two, if we don't do something with that and take action, then nothing's going to change.
No,
Right.
nothing. Nothing.
And something I say a lot in every time I give any kind of speeches, but my ending statement is always, if not you, then who?
I love that.
And if not now, then when?
Then when? It's so true. It's so
And
true.
I know that that's from Dr. Seuss and the Lorax. And I always share, I
But
take a lot of statements from
it is
people
yours
who have
though. It's
said things
yours.
permanent, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
it's relevant. I think all of us take different things
Hmm.
that resonate with us because we say that if
Hmm.
something resonates in our heart, we'll remember it in our brain. And if we
Hmm.
remember it in our brain, we'll use it in our words and our actions. But we
Oh,
never
so true.
say something that doesn't resonate with us.
Right.
There's
Right.
a
If
disconnect.
yeah, if it lands in your heart, yeah, you're gonna do something with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so true. That's
Yeah.
so true.
Yeah. So,
I
Jen, we
love
have
it.
been talking for almost
Yeah.
45 minutes already. I can't believe it. This has been a great conversation
Awesome.
as always. We're going to
Thank
definitely come back
you.
again.
These are great conversations.
Yeah.
I'm sure people are going to tune in, because this is something that's happening right now. Women being at the forefront of so many businesses. We're
Mhm.
all being seen and
Mhm.
heard, maybe the way we wouldn't want to. So,
Mhm.
definitely a hot topic.
Yeah,
Thank you so much
absolutely.
for having me. This was
Thank
awesome.
you so much for joining again, Jen. And thank you everyone for listening. Make sure you follow our YouTube accounts to catch previous episodes of the Jen and Meg show on transforming social justice and check out Us Two Consulting, and LA Expedite. We're
Oh,
all on
thank you.
social media. We do lots of fun things, and Jen and I would both love your follows, your likes, your comments. Check us out, communicate with us, tell us how we can support you better, and we look forward to the next session together. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.